Paul Dervin in Ireland, in the top right, he's officially hosting, and we're going to get going, all right? So we're live. Go ahead. Paul, take it away.
Good morning, John. Good morning, John. Good afternoon, everybody else. Good morning, Canada. And thanks for joining us. John, in particular, thank you very much for being with us today and sharing your insights on this really important topic. I just, by way of a couple of words of introduction and maybe scene setting, I think the global class is different, and I've been trying to explain to my students that it's about interactive learning. And when we talk about things being different, I'm always reminded of that great words of Charles Darwin. You know, it's not the most intelligent that will survive. It's not the strongest that will survive. It's those that can adapt. So in a sense, I think we're all today adapting to a new way of learning. So I'd like us to do something different. First of all, to acknowledge John's presence here with us and Lon Appleby for creating this concept. And I'd like you to give them a round of applause. Let's do something different.
Oh, thank you. We'll give everybody. Give everybody a round of applause for showing up, and especially. Thanks, Paul. Go ahead.
So I just want to say to the students that this is not about anybody pouring knowledge from a coffee pot or a teapot into your head. This is about interaction and it's about dialogue. And I really want to encourage everybody in Blanchardstown in Dublin, in Budapest, and in Durham College in Oshawa, where I have had the opportunity to visit, to please participate and think interaction. Otherwise, Lon is likely to put us under severe pressure. I know that from past experience. So, I just want to say to you before we kick off over to John that in terms of the structure, we're going to give John 10 minutes of protected time because he just has so many insights about this. We really want to hear what he has to say. But after that, once we're sort of into the open field, so to speak, I would like the students really to think in terms, if you want to make a point, in order to help me, would you just please put up your hand? And remember, no question is too silly. No point is to be dismissed. We want to listen to views and we want to create interaction. It's not about us pouring knowledge, so we want interaction. So before I hand over to John and give him his 10 minutes protected time, what I'd like to do is maybe just two students from either area, from each location, just to introduce themselves, say who they are, where they are, and what they're doing here, if that would be okay. Just to get us started, just to break down the barriers a little bit, and I'll ask my own students here maybe to get the ball rolling. Christine, would you start?
My name is O'Neill. I study in General Business in the Institute of Technology of Blanchardstown. I'm here because we are doing a module called Sustainability.
My name is Natalie O'Donnell. I'm also doing General Business. I'm also in the Sustainability class, and I'm here because I just want to learn as much as I can and get as many views that I can get possibly.
Thank you very much. If we could go to Budapest, please, if two students maybe would introduce themselves, please.
And I'm studying on BBS, Budapest Business School, International Relations, and sadly I don't have a sustainability class, but I love to.
Yeah. Hi. Nice to see you again, John. Nice to see you again, Lon. Pleasure to meet you, Paul. I'm Daniel. I've been in the global class for what seems like an eternity now. Yeah, I'm not a student anymore, but I'm surrounded by master's students of international studies, so I'm in good company. And I hope that they will make me look smart, because clearly that's something I can't handle on my own, so I'm just going to rely on them. This is the first and the last time I speak today, so the pressure is on them now.
That's it, come on. Okay, and Durham College?
Okay. I'm not going to say anything, even though as a professor I do feel now like I'm a student, because that's the unspoken thing about teaching, is professors are students too. So, but I'm not saying I'm not a student. So, two students here? Christian, you want to go ahead? Just the mic's there.
So my name's Christian, and I'm in a general arts and science program, and I take this class because I'm really curious about different people around the world and different cultures.
Great. Majura, want to?
Sure. My name is Majorin. I'm in electronics engineering technology, and I decided to take this class so that I could see and help shape where humanity is going to end up.
Very good.
Very good. And can I just go back to Budapest? Can I just get the two names of the Budapest students or Budapest people there? Sorry, I missed the names. If you wouldn't mind giving me the names.
Her name was Corina.
Arena.
Yeah. My name was Daniel.
Daniel. Okay. Thanks. Thank you very much, Daniel. And so, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to John. And John, you're very welcome, and really sincerely, thanks for being with us today. It's brilliant that you're here to share your thoughts with us. Thank you very much. We'll give you your 10 minutes of protected time.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and good day to you all. It's a pleasure to be back on the agenda for the global class, and I hope we can have some fruitful conversation. As I understand the class outline, the theme for today is peak oil. Is it a blessing in disguise? And so let me just spend a moment bringing you up to date on what I think is the current state of the fossil fuel industry, focusing on oil and gas. We will set coal aside for now because that's not our focus. But when we look at oil and gas, let me say the following, all of which is factual. We are currently consuming about 96 million barrels of oil a day. We are currently producing just a little bit more than 96 million barrels a day. The last time we met as a class, we were producing 94 million barrels a day and consuming about the same amount. So oil is in close equilibrium between the supply and the demand. When I was the brand new president of Shell Oil Company in 2005, the world was consuming, now this was 12 years ago, in 2005, the world was consuming approximately 85 million barrels a day. 84 million barrels. And so we have climbed in the last 12 years about almost 8 million barrels a day of consumption. And when I joined in 2005, the big issue of the day in the United States is what year will we reach peak oil? And peak oil is defined as the highest level of oil consumption or oil production that the world will know, following which there is a long receding period of using less oil. So if in 2005 we were using 84, 85 million barrels a day, and today we're using 96, correct my math, we're using 11 million more barrels a day from a time when everyone was predicting peak oil between 2005 and 2007, let's say. I actually went to some university campuses where there were celebrations of peak oil going on, where students were celebrating the fact that we were not going to be consuming more oil because we had peaked. And yet here we are, 2017, 96 million barrels a day. So that's factual. Now, let me go through some of the underlying issues we face. There remain several billion people on the earth with no access to oil or natural gas. They want access to oil and natural gas. There are nearly 1 billion automobiles on the roads of the world, and those automobiles, 99 point something percent, all rely on oil products or ethanol mixed with oil to drive the internal combustion engines that propel those automobiles. I make reference to 3 studies which you can access on the web, on the Fuel Freedom Foundation website. And if somebody right now wants to go to the Fuel Freedom Foundation website, just www.fuelfreedomfoundation.org, I think it is, or .com, you will find these three studies cited. One is from the IEA, that is the International Energy Agency, which is a credible OECD organization. The second is from Bloomberg, which is a credible global financial organization. And the third is from Goldman Sachs. They estimate the number of internal combustion engines that will be on the highways of the world in 2050. And the conclusion of all three studies is that approximately 1/2 of all engines in the world by the year 2050 will be internal combustion engines. That and the estimate is there will be 2 billion cars on the roads of the world by 2050, which is roughly 1 billion which will be internal combustion engines. 2050 is what? 33 years from now. So in 33 years, add 33 years to your current age, it's estimated that the world will be using approximately the same amount of oil as we are using today. That's an amazing statistic confirmed by 3 different studies from 3 different sources. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to electrify the fleet. It means that half of all cars on the road in 2050 will be electrified, which I think is great. Hydrogen fuel cells, battery electric vehicles, it's an alternative, and I believe in alternatives. I believe in competition. Let the best survive. That's the name of competition. But it also implies that we will continue to be dependent upon oil for half the transportation vehicles in the world in 33 years from now. So that's quite an amazing statistic for those who are advocates of peak oil. And it says that there will be a very, very long plateau to peak oil as we think about the future. But let me go one step further, and this will be the point I will end my remarks on. There are 2 fundamental negatives, in my view, with respect to use of crude oil and natural gas. One is environmental. There is no denying the fact that the use of fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, we exclude coal, but only for today, but we could include coal tomorrow, produces an extraordinary amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, which I believe contributes to man-made pollution of the atmosphere. And whether you call it global warming or whether you call it excessive waste in the atmosphere, and the issue is the Earth has to deal with it. And whether it's dealing with it through the oceans, whether it's dealing with it through the absorption of that CO2 by natural photosynthesis, which is a natural process, or however we're dealing with CO2, we're going to have more of it, man-made. And so that is an issue for many, many people around the world. That's the first and primary negative of fossil fuels. The second is that oil is not everywhere. Oil is located where the geology of the earth has created such oil. That has led to a pernicious, and if you haven't heard the word pernicious before, if you're not an English speaker, it means bad outcome. A pernicious bad outcome of geopolitics between the haves and the have-nots of oil. And as we know today, the Middle East is a part of the world on fire. There is nothing on this earth working to put out the fire. It's not the Russians, it's not the Iranians, it's not the Saudis, it's not the Americans, it's not the Europeans. Nothing can stop the fire of the Middle East, in which people hate people. And those people who hate each other are killing each other of different ethnic backgrounds or of similar ethnic backgrounds The killing field continues as it has in modern times, your entire lifetime, my entire lifetime. And the killing is not going to stop because there's nothing on earth that is capable of stopping it, which will continue to affect geopolitics for the future as far as we can see out. Meanwhile, Russia, China, United States, Western Europe, primary consumers of oil, primary producers of oil, all of them. And they will continue to depend on oil. So the two negative factors, environmental impact and geopolitical impact, are two huge negatives. Let me switch to the positives and then I'll stop. The positives of oil. It is a tremendous source of energy. No denying it. We've been using it for 100 years or more. It's a tremendous source of energy which fuels the world's transportation and mobility marketplace. Without that oil, we don't fly. Without that oil, we don't use water transport. Without that oil, we don't use automobiles or trucks. Because that oil is what keeps everything moving, and we are a world that is entirely dependent upon mobility. So if we're hoping for peak oil, we do not have a substitute of sufficient materiality, of sufficient size and scale to displace the oil that is used for transportation. But that's just one benefit of oil. Another is the fact that oil is integrated over these 100 years of history into virtually every part of every nation's economy. So whether it's food, housing, clothing, you can't do it without oil. Oil is part and parcel of the plumbing pipes in the house, the electric wiring, the construction materials that are used containing oil, whether that's the wallboard or whether that's other building aspects of our housing. Our clothes have lots of petrochemicals associated with them, including the very fibers that are hiding our nakedness or are creating the warmth in winter or the cool fabrics of summer. And food, whether it is the processing of food, the harvesting of food, whether it is the chemical substances added to food to preserve food so it doesn't spoil and cause us to be sick. Basic fundamental human needs, clothes, housing, and food, are critically dependent upon oil. Then there's our whole energy lifestyle, the electrons and the molecules that provide, as I mentioned earlier, the mobility. But what about the light? What about the electrons from natural gas that fuel our computers, our ability to communicate, our social networking, all of which come from electrons? Then there's medicine, healthcare, and the chemicals associated with medicine and healthcare coming from oil, believe it or not. Whether it's the fabric, whether it's the chemicals, whether it is the other materials that we use in life to sustain our health and well-being, whether it's artificial joints or whether it's extraordinary pharmaceuticals that are made from the molecules of crude oil that provide life-giving substance to people who are otherwise ill and sick and enfeebled, they get strength from these chemicals. Then there's the whole defense and security mechanism of the world. We may not like war, but it's hard to deny that war has somehow disappeared. It's everywhere. The world is at war and has been at war since World War II. There's not a period of peace in this world, and the peace is secured by the use of oil products. And whether we like that or not, it is a fact of daily life. Then there's the whole economic growth, economic development, and economic well-being that comes from the value created by the addition of oil to the economy. The developing world will not develop without oil or natural gas or coal. So I bring coal back in for a moment. The developing world is minus energy, negative energy. And in order to become part of the developed world, the only way forward is with increased amounts of energy. And the 2 billion people or more that don't have access to energy are crying for energy, demanding energy. And so the likelihood of additional peoples having access to more energy says that I believe we are a long way from losing our dependence on oil. And I'll stop there. Thanks for listening.
John, thank you very much. That's a very powerful opening statement, and I think it really sets the scene for our sort of discussion this afternoon. I'm going to just check with the students because it's about interaction. And so, is there anybody, student, who would like to make a comment or ask a question or clarification on what John has said? Could you put up your hand? And please don't be shy. Yes,
Christian, go ahead. Yeah.
When we talk about alternative energy, we often talk about like Tesla cars and these high-performing vehicles using solar panels and all that. But I have a question: is when we look at lithium mines, so far most lithium is from South America. It's a much smaller limitation than oil. Do you think that will be a good alternative for a long period of time, or is it just a short one until we find something else?
Well, fortunately, there is a lot of lithium in the world, but finding the economical and easy to produce assets in locations where it can be produced is more difficult. And in other words, in order to increase the supply of batteries that depend upon lithium, the world is going to need to produce a significant greater amount of lithium that is suitable for battery production. And the purest and most available source, as you mentioned, is from South America. I believe it's either Chile or Argentina. And the quest or the search for more lithium is ongoing. And there is a lot of lithium in the world, but it's not easily obtained, or it's not economically obtained. And we must also keep in mind, for those who are environmentally conscious and sensitive, the mining of lithium is a filthy, dirty process that consumes enormous amounts of water in water-scarce regions of the world. And if people are concerned about the environmental imbalance caused by the production of fossil fuels, whether it's with fracking, whether it's with other means and technologies, those same environmentally sensitive individuals would be classified as hypocrites if they are gung-ho lithium production, but anti-fossil fuel production, because the economic as well as the environmental impact is similarly valuable from an economic standpoint, but destructive from an environmental standpoint. In addition, there is the recycling of the battery materials, which happens as batteries expire or become unable to hold a charge, and the environmental implications of reprocessing the battery materials is not yet a factor in the environmental consequences of lithium batteries, but it will become one. And if we don't do it responsibly and well, we will see huge environmental issues from the recycling or the decommissioning of the millions of batteries around the world. And we haven't had a good history, as you well know, of the recycling of all of the electronic materials that have come into being in the last, say, 20 years. We have issues with the recycling of electronic materials in terms of separating the good from the bad and burying or somehow otherwise treating the waste. And so the environmental issues aren't going away with respect to electronics and batteries any more than they are currently going away with respect to fossil fuels. So we're a dirty people, folks, and finding the mechanisms to clean up after ourselves have been pretty difficult and pretty challenging. But I believe we can do that. In fact, I've written about that in my book, Why We Hate the Oil Companies. We have a responsibility to become waste-free.
John, I just want to say that We Are a Dirty People is now going on a PowerPoint slide here that I'm going to present back shortly as notes to review with the class. So get ready, okay? We're going to have to explore that. But anyways, but I'll go back to Paul. I don't want to hijack a class here, okay?
Oh, that's
great. We Are a Dirty People. I'm putting that down, and then we're coming back. Go ahead, Paul.
It's a great question, Lon.
Yeah.
And for 10 marks, what's the answer? Here's what I do at this stage, just to reflect back to the students, because we actually, in the sort of the theme of the class is peak oil, a blessing in disguise. And what I would challenge the students and participants in each location is that when I was thinking about this myself, there are 3 possible answers. Yes, it is a blessing in disguise. No, it's not a blessing in disguise. And the great answer, it depends. And so what I would like to do maybe for a minute or two before we take the question about the dirty question, if I can put it that way, is what do people think? Having listened to John, what's the answer to the question? Is peak oil a blessing in disguise? What do we think in each location? Maybe we might just take a minute and to see if there's any differences from any of the locations. What do people think based on what John has said and your own reading and your own understanding of what's going on in your own country? Is peak oil a blessing in disguise? It is. It isn't. Or it depends. And if it depends, if that's your answer, well, what does it depend on? Would we take a minute to do that and then come back and see? Somebody might be able to speak from the different areas to say, what do we think the answer is? And then John may be able to comment further. Would that work?
Take a minute. Well, maybe Paul, we might even just so we don't take the minute, because we might have to mute the microphones and everything, and it might be difficult. Why don't we just go straight to the answer and see if there's any student, perhaps in Budapest or here, that would like to address it, and then we'll keep going. It's a great question. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Daniel.
Yeah, because I know Majoran wants, but Budapest. Let's go to Budapest and.
Daniel?
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Yes. I don't know what the other students here think, but the first thing that popped to my mind is that whether or not it's a blessing in disguise, it makes very little difference if you phrase it like that, because it's very intangible. Whether it's a blessing in disguise or not, it's going to be decided by how it affects people. And if you tell me that it's going to have X consequence in 80 years, that's also very intangible, because it's in 80 years. It's very hard to think that far into the future. So the question I would ask John in this regard is, well, 2 questions actually. The first one is, what do you think an environmentally conscious, not necessarily green, but an environmentally conscious young man or woman is out to do? And the second question would be, considering that there are a lot of business students in here and people that are about to start their careers in a year or so, or in the very near future, if a student wanted to make a career in a field that is constantly evolving and adapting, and clearly energy is one of these fields, what's a student out to do? How should they grab this as an opportunity to begin their career and then further their careers?
Good question.
In my opinion, and I think there are many, many facts available to support this opinion, the greatest and the most grievous issue with energy and its implications on the environment is what I would call energy ignorance. In addition to being a dirty people, we are largely an ignorant people. And that is, we do not know the facts. And the facts matter. There are factual conclusions that can be drawn about the economic value creation that comes from electrons and molecules. And everybody intuitively knows that life is better with electrons and with the transportation molecules that we consume. But the energy ignorance is people do not comprehend or understand the negative consequences of the consumption of those electrons and those molecules in ways that are A, wasteful, B, environmentally destructive, or C, that are just truly irresponsible. And those three realities exist: wasteful, irresponsible, and just simply destructive. And we have to work with information, knowledge, awareness, intelligence to be able to deal with those consequences. We can, and we have. In many countries around the world, whether it's the North Sea, whether it's the Gulf of Mexico, whether it is the plains of Texas, or whether it is the offshore Brazil or the onshore regions of Romania or other parts of the world, where we have regulations in place and where those regulations are honored and enforced, we have sustainable production of oil and natural gas. We have closed systems technology to avoid leakage of methane. We have closed systems technology to avoid the leakage of oil molecules. And so where we have the closed systems and where we have the enforcement ongoing, we can actually do the mining. And that's what it is. It's mining. It's the excavation of the earth and the use of substances from the earth in ways that are not negatively impacting society, which makes it a sustainable process. It's where we violate the rules. It's where we don't enforce the regulations. It's where people willingly or knowingly go out of their way or simply through ignorance don't realize that what they're doing is wasteful or destructive or irresponsible. That's where we have serious problems. So I'm of the view that a well-regulated, well-enforced regime, meaning a legal order, for the production of the minerals that we're producing is a sustainable proposition, but only if everyone cooperates. And that means companies have to cooperate. That means individuals have to cooperate. You may have read about in recent weeks or months a total fiasco in the United States with respect to a pipeline called Dakota Access, which is one of hundreds of pipelines in the country, about 1,000 miles long, where there is a huge protest over roughly a 300 or 400 foot extension of the pipeline under a lake to move oil across this body of water by going under it rather than over it or through it. And there has been this massive popular protest against a company building the pipeline called Energy Transfer Partners, which has rigorously used the legal process to get every permit, every license, everything that had to be done legally has been done. But at the end of the pipeline, the last few miles of the pipeline, a social protest has emerged claiming the violation of Aboriginal rights in North Dakota, where the tribes of North Dakota previously signed off on the pipeline. But some individuals said, well, our views weren't listened to, so we're going to protest. And suddenly, thousands of people appear from outside North Dakota. Well, those thousands of people set up camp to protest the pipeline. And today, the authorities of North Dakota are dealing with unmitigated human sanitation issues that are, as the snow melts and the ice melts, human waste is going into the water system because the protesters made no provision for the management of their own waste products. And so the pollution that was envisioned from a potential pipeline leak of some sort has been way exceeded by the human waste that has been simply dumped on the surface of frozen ground in North Dakota. And the people of North Dakota are beside themselves with frustration and anger at the irresponsible behavior of people from all over the United States who showed up to basically do their toilet behavior on the surface of North Dakota's winter. How can you be so irresponsible?
It is, but I want to come. John, can I just interrupt for a second? Because I want to come back to what Daniel said in Budapest and just ask him. Because, Daniel, you started with the question of, what does an environmentally conscious young person do now? Do you think that John is answering that question in terms of environmental consciousness? Or, and I'm just going to be frank, because I know you can take this, John, is he just answering the question like any big oil CEO would answer, which is the problem is the protesters. It's the irresponsibility of the young people protesting, and they're causing all the waste to go in there because of their crap, of going to the toilet and everything. Isn't that just a lame answer from of a CEO of a former oil company? Daniel, what do you think?
Well, the thought that I had was that, John clearly is a very experienced person when it comes to answering questions in a manner that doesn't actually answer the question, but makes you feel good anyway. Because I think that's what happened. Because that was an amazing answer. We were all glued to the screen, right? But it had nothing to do with the question. It was still very informative, just not an answer. With that being said, I was going to pose another question, a follow-up question, to kind of try to steer John back to the original question, which would have been, so basically your job as a CEO is in many ways is to influence people, right? So you influence committees, you influence your own colleagues, you influence media. You're an influencer in short. So how would you influence the students, the groups that are right here, right now, listening to you, to do as you see, to follow a path that you would deem correct? Not necessarily, righteous or very environmentally friendly, just right, or less wrong than what people generally do.
With respect to closing out the first question, the main point is replacing energy ignorance and environmental ignorance with knowledge and factual information. And while I may have, gone on and on telling the story of the answer in part, the main point of what should a student do to be environmentally conscious is to replace ignorance with knowledge. With respect to the second question with respect to the influence capability that a CEO in his or her position might have to influence other decision makers, and I can tell you I have walked the halls of state capitals, of city councils, and of Washington, U.S. Capitol, miles and miles of interactions with lawmakers. The whole point of that interaction and influence is to try to bring reason, pragmatism, to displace ideology. There is nothing ideological about a molecule or an electron. An electron is not Democratic or Republican, socialist or conservative. An electron is an electron. A molecule of energy that is oil or is biofuel or is from some other source is not Democratic or Republican or socialist or conservative. It's just a basic entity of energy that provides value. And so when decision makers, whether it's the prime minister of a country or the president, we currently have this anomalous situation in the U.S. where Barack Obama had a certain ideology about energy, and Donald Trump has a certain ideology about energy. And guess what? America's going backwards, not forwards, because of ideology. So Trump is going to undo everything Obama tried to do, and there's nothing the Democrats can do to stop it until they might win back the White House or the Senate or the House of Representatives. And so we get wrapped up in this ideology of energy, which is absolutely non-productive. So my advice to both influence people like CEOs or to students becoming aware of the world in which they live, strip out the nonsense of ideological subscription. Go with facts. go with pragmatics. That requires an open mind. It requires a curiosity of additional learning. It requires an openness of discussion. And it involves the pragmatic application of facts to solutions. I described, for example, the closed system technology, which prevents molecules from leaking out of an oil product system. And that can be foolproof, and it can work. Occasionally there's breakdowns, and the breakdowns can be cleaned up and fixed. But to have this closed-minded notion that somehow molecules are bad or good, no, they just are. They just exist. So from an influence standpoint and from a student learning standpoint, I'm a strong advocate of just pragmatic learning, setting aside ideology, which in the end buys nothing.
It's great.
John,
Sure.
John, I'd like to maybe pose the question to the Canadian students as well, like just going back to our theme. And Daniel, thanks very much. They were really good questions and they generated some really good discussion. But to the Canadian students, is peak oil, from your perspective, is it a blessing in disguise? Yes, no, or maybe?
I'd like to comment.
Do you want it, Frank? Go ahead. Yep. Can you see? Here, come over. Yeah, a little bit. There we go. There, Frank, go ahead.
Okay. So my question is regarding more so the economics of peak oil. My comment is, I think it would be good that peak oil comes along, and it is a blessing in disguise, because just the concentration of GDP, global GDP, in oil and oil products, oil byproducts, it seems unhealthy. So, I'll use the example of the financial crisis about 10 years ago in the U.S. There was an overconcentration, especially in areas like Florida and such, where they were so dependent on the economy from the real estate that when something bad happened, they really, really got hit hard. And I mean, you can still pick up a house with a pool in Florida for relatively cheap. And it's 10 years later almost. So, obviously that isn't a good thing, because you never know what tomorrow may bring. You need a supply line. There's serious concentration of infrastructure and stuff like that. There's only a few places that produce. Whereas if you were pushed from that, then you would have to look at more localized, diversified ways of producing oil and stuff to make clothes and, the stuff that byproducts are used for, right?
Can I just check then? You're arguing that yes, peak oil is a blessing in disguise. The fact that we're going to have less oil, that is a blessing in disguise. So it's better that way. It is a blessing in disguise. Less oil. So you're not convinced by what John has said about our reliance on, for food, clothing, transport, medicine, travel, everything we do, we depend on oil. If you believe that if that dries up, it's a good thing.
Yeah, it'll force diversification of how we produce resources such as energy and different things, and when you have such concentration of, so for example, you've got most of the oil coming from like a really small percentage of the planet, and that just can't be healthy. Diversification and the opposite of centralization always proves to be healthy. I mean, that's why we're not just one big cellular organism. We've got, trillions of them, right?
But do you think there's evidence? John has spoken about the need to be pragmatic and to have facts and to base your thinking on facts and try and put facts to work to solving problems. Do you think there's strong evidence that we are, as a people, as global citizens, capable of coming up with alternatives and weaning ourselves off this really, really precious product that we have? Do you think
I think the best inventions have come from people just doing experiments in their garage or their basement. History has shown that. And you never know what one individual may bring forth to the world, right? So, again, it's all about advancement, right? We've been doing the whole oil thing for 100 years. It's become really concentrated. There's a lot of negative outcome associated with it. And I mean, nuclear is not really an alternative either.
So you're, Frank, you're confident. I'm just going to ask him a question. You believe that humans can solve any problem, that even if oil now is presenting this very difficult choice that we have to get off it eventually, it will run out, it causes pollution. Don't panic. It's okay. Humans can solve it. Do you take that view?
Yeah, you just got to, tie in the economics, right? Incentivize people to do all these things.
Can I ask a question?
Michaela, do you want to come up here so we can hear? Come through and sit here, okay? Just because there's a student. While she's coming up, Paul, is there anything else? Because I know she'll have something to say. She normally does, but come.
What I would be interested, Lon, in just getting a perspective from the students is from the different locations is what initiative they point to in their respective countries that demonstrates that governments are serious about bringing their citizens on this journey to an alternative to cater for an eventuality that we know is going to come about.
Well, we can come to any student in a moment. I just want to establish one thing, okay? Because I think, and I just want to ask John. John, do we have peak oil? Should we be worried about peak oil? Because you seem to suggest that maybe we don't have to, that we're consuming more oil because we're finding more oil and there will always be enough oil. Can you answer very briefly, yes or no, just so my students know? Is there such a thing, John, as peak oil? Yes or no?
There is, but not yet.
Okay, John,
there will be peak oil, and we will see it in the rearview mirror of our journey through life.
Okay, but hold on. Let me just
let
me get specific. Let me get specific because these are students who, they're in their teens, their 20s, they're going to go through many years ahead. Are they going to see peak oil in their lifetime? Will they have to deal with this? And will their children and their grandchildren have to deal with this question in a much more serious way than we're dealing with it now? Yes or no?
I do not believe that today's generations living on Earth will see peak fossil fuel in their lifetime.
Their children?
Now that's an expansion on oil.
Okay.
There may be less oil in the mix, but there will be more natural gas. There may be more or less coal in the mix, depending upon how the world regulates the environment, if it does. But the issue of peak is not yet known because the availability of oil is huge. The affordability of oil is very good. And the need for oil is great. Now, here's one other element that hasn't entered into the conversation yet, and that is how do we open up competition for other sources of energy in ways that are fair, commercial, and productive to society? Because there are all kinds of barriers established across democracies and across authoritarian states that preclude real competition for energy.
Right.
And so one of my primary activities now is trying to strip away the obstacles to increasing fuel, let's say, from natural gas, which is much cleaner and much more available and much cheaper than oil. And the obstacles to using natural gas as a transportation fuel are huge. And unless you strip away the obstacles to competition, all the talk about alternatives will mostly be talk, not action.
Sure. Got it. Okay, sorry. Paul, can I come back to the students and let them answer? And go ahead, Paul. Yeah.
So you had a student?
Yeah, there's a student, Majoran. Go ahead. The question was, Paul, can you rephrase the question for Majoran? Just
is peak oil a blessing in disguise?
Come back to that big question. Okay, sure.
I think that was.
Yeah, there was a question about what is our country doing? What are we doing? Any programs in Canada that you could point to that relate? But that's okay.
I can't really point to an example of alternative energy usage programs in Canada, but I can point to Tesla in the U.S. I came across an article in the Toronto Metro newspaper, so I'm pretty sure that's reputable.
Pretty well.
And it said, and in that article was Elon Musk and Tesla's plan to ramp up production on their Tesla cars. And it seems to me that there is growing demand for it, and there's more demand for more responsible uses of energy.
And alternative sources of energy. So they're
you could say that, but honestly, I don't think it's so much alternative as an actual end as a sort of means to an end. It sounds good, and you can do more with it. It's more.
all right. Good. Thanks.
Another student there wants to.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Just a follow-up and on what John said. It's the question of, even if we go from electric cars and all that, but is it a valid competitor to oil, like John mentioned? That's the big question. Do we have something that's equal or better when it comes to producing energy and giving us what we need, right? Because when we look at oil, we do just we focus heavily on the carb aspect, but we look at all the little things that it does, right? To plastic, to toothpaste, to basically anything that you use in your house every day. There's oil.
Yeah.
So is there anything that's equal or better that that could compete with it, natural or like human-made?
That's a good question. John, do you want to?
John, do you want to comment?
Yes. If I was a young person looking at tomorrow's technologies that could displace oil, I would spend my time and energy learning as much as I could about biomass. We are discovering and unlocking the capability of biomass to displace oil. Now, we're not there yet, and we haven't had some of the huge breakthroughs, whether they come from somebody's garage or somebody's basement or somebody's R&D lab in a major university or corporation. But biomass is essentially a carbon product. It's not fossilized. It's living biomass, but it has the same properties chemically, ultimately, as fossil biomass, which is oil by another name. And so whether it's fossilized oil or whether it is currently produced biomass, the chemical opportunity for outcomes, in my opinion, and I'm not a technologist, so forgive me, but the opportunity for outcomes, I think, is huge. And I think a world of, let's call it the 22nd century, because I think the 21st century will be primarily transitional. But in the 22nd century, if things work well and if we stay focused on the future, we could see wind and solar, free sources of energy, as primary sources of electrons, and we could see biomass grown regularly in temperate zones of the world as the primary source of feedstock for all the chemicals that we use today. And that is a sustainable, replaceable, renewable alternative that precludes a future of dependency on fossil fuels. And I think that's where I'd be spending my time if I were scientifically inclined.
Super, John.
Question here? Excellent. There's a question here. Do you want to go to Budapest? But there's a question here as well. Should we go here?
Yeah, take the question, and then we go to Budapest.
Okay, so, Laurent? Yeah.
Mine's really quick. It's just to kind of
Go ahead, take your time.
extend off of what
Yeah.
John
Okay,
was
yeah.
just saying. But if we start looking at other sources to kind of combat.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Okay, we'll bring, it's, just don't drop it or there's $1,000 broken, and I've done it twice.
So
Go ahead, Laurel. Yeah.
if we are to look at other sources to replace oil and start diminishing our use of oil, like say my generation starts working on that now,
Yeah.
can we reduce that like effect of getting to that level of peak oil? Can we stop it before it happens, since we are already like, we're not quite there yet?
Right,
We
sure,
still have
sure.
time to kind of reverse things. Is it possible to do that? Yeah, kind of wait it out, and like we can balance it out, so we still use
Yeah.
oil to a degree, but we're not using all of it, and we don't hit that peak.
Did you get that, John? Could you hear that?
Yes, yes, I did.
Regulated almost?
Sure, go ahead. Good question.
Regulated
Do you want to answer? Please answer.
Yeah, okay.
I believe we could if we were organized, and if we were consistent, and if we were disciplined. And that is a pretty difficult demand on what is largely an energy ignorant population. And I don't mean to be cynical about it, but here's a very real issue. Getting the world to cooperate and getting the world to operate in common fashion is very, very challenging, if not impossible. Because what you're up against in your suggestion is what is called in the industry scale. Scale is the magnitude of what is currently being done with oil. So the 96 million barrels a day, 96 million times 45 gallons per barrel is the amount of oil we use every day. And if you're talking about delaying or deferring or reducing, if the efforts aren't organized and consistent across a very large population, then the impact of what you're doing is minimal at best. And so you're not really impacting, you are sort of touching the surface, so to speak. And I don't mean to disparage the idea. It means, how do you achieve scalability? Now, the world came together in Paris in December 2015 to sign the Paris Accords, a UN-led effort to affect global climate change, with 99 pages of should-dos. Those 99 pages of should-dos commit the world, in one sense, to follow a coherent, collective, organized process to reduce the impact on the climate. But there's a big flaw in the document which nobody is willing to talk about publicly. And the flaw in the document is that there's not one sentence in 99 pages that speaks to the enforcement of what has been agreed to. It therefore is essentially a voluntary document which people can adhere to if they choose. But if they choose to ignore, or choose to pretend, or choose to lie, or whatever they do, there is no assurance, no guarantee, no enforcement of what was agreed to by all of these nations in Paris a year and a half ago. And for that document to be touted as a global agreement, yeah, it was an agreement of words, but it wasn't an agreement of actions, or there would be an enforcement proceeding, and there isn't any. And while people will use, let's say, influence or persuasion or the threat of reputational damage to try to make progress on what was agreed to, it's a very sketchy way forward, but it's the best we could accomplish in the year 2015. I would argue that that's not quite good enough when you have a world that is so fragmented and so opportunistic in their own right, so needy in the case of developing countries, so prosperous in the context of developed countries who don't want to change their way of life, so difficult for democratic countries, so unenforceable in terms of authoritarian countries. So the suggestion that we could cooperate and achieve scale, I think, is the challenge that comes right back at your suggestion.
Lon, I just want to, if there's no other comments from Canada, I just want to check here in Dublin that none of the students want to come in and make a point or an observation. Yes, Carl. So this is Carl here.
Hi, you're just saying biomass is the biggest alternative.
Carl, you want to just come up here, please?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah. I know we're getting a biomass question. I heard biomass, John, so get ready for biomass. I think you're going to get more questions around biomass. Go ahead. Carl, go ahead.
So I know you're saying biomass is the biggest alternative to oil at the moment, in your opinion. Is that correct?
Could somebody repeat the question?
Yes, John, sorry, Carl, go ahead.
So, in your opinion, you think biomass is the biggest alternative to oil?
I do, yes. I think that biomass, because of the amount available, which is huge, and we haven't really measured how much biomass is available. I think if we could have some additional breakthrough technologies that enable us to process the biomass and to refine the chemical molecules that come from biomass through some refining mechanism, I think to me that is the substitute for oil over the longer term.
And I'm just wondering as well, do you think that water could be another option because it's so renewable?
I think water offers many opportunities, but I frankly don't think it has enough chemical compounds because we're really talking about hydrogen and oxygen, whereas in biomass you have a much more complex and much more molecule-rich source of feedstock than you do with water. But I'm the least knowledgeable about chemicals probably in this room or in our collective classrooms, and so don't want to pretend that I know more than I do. Water has many, many benefits and many assets to it, hydrogen being the primary for the manipulation, but I think it requires additional molecular substance beyond hydrogen to be as valuable in the total value chain of uses as, let's say, oil is.
Okay.
Just on a point, I just want to share a point of information, Lon and John, and just to your point, John, I was listening to a radio program in Ireland about 4 weeks ago, and there is this farm in Ireland, and they raise thousands and thousands of chickens, and it's run by two brothers, and one of them is an engineer. And they have started taking, apart from selling the chickens for food, they've started taking the waste from the chickens and they've created this biomass, exactly what you're talking about. And it's been hugely successful to the extent that they have gone and exported the idea to, I think it's in Iowa in the US, where there's lots of chickens. Maybe I've got the location wrong, but there's a particular part of America that they raise a lot of chickens. And they've got this idea here, and effectively they are doing exactly what you spoke about there. They're creating biomass for creating energy out of chicken waste. I just want to share that.
Yes, and essentially it's the principle of carbon waste.
Yeah.
If there is carbon material available, whether it's chicken flesh, chicken fat, chicken bones, chicken feathers, or whether it is plants, or you could extend it to the human body because we are loaded up with carbon. It is the manipulation of carbon molecules that is the source of so much energy. Carbon is a very rich source of energy potential, and harnessing that carbon molecule is wherever it comes from. And where we've been successful over the last 100 years is optimizing the value of the fossil carbon molecule. And I believe that science will move on, and we will look back on the 20th century as truly ancient history with respect to the amount of money and the amount of time spent harvesting fossil molecules when we have so many living molecules available to us that once they are dead and available for the manipulation of a refining process, and we can obtain the benefit of that, so be it. And we just haven't harvested that or cracked it enough to get the code to manipulate all of the carbon molecules. But one day we will do better than we do currently.
I just see Daniel is getting the microphone ready again. So, Daniel, do you want to speak, or is there somebody in Budapest who wants to come in and make a point?
Yeah, leave a comment. Hi.
Hello.
My name is Daniel.
We have 15 minutes left.
Okay, I'll be quick. So this isn't a question; it's more like a personal comment. I'm really worried because you've mentioned that. So we can only touch the surface of this whole problem individually. And my concern is that the key figures who are actually have the ability to change things and to move forward and move the world forward, most of the times they do not believe in global warming and about these things. And especially Mr. Trump, who is now disregarding everything what Mr. Obama have done in the last few years. And I'm really worried that we as individuals, we cannot really influence these things. And the people who can, they just don't care, or they don't have the capacity to understand that this is a really huge issue. And I've watched Jon Stewart's Daily Show. And he was in one episode he was analyzing there was like a Senate meeting or something in the U.S. Senate about global warming, and it was really funny to watch
We've lost audio in Budapest. Can you raise your, turn it up.
Okay, so...
Great, you're back.
So Jon Stewart analyzed this, and it was really funny to see that, and also not just funny, but actually it was really bad to see that politicians just couldn't grasp what this whole global warming is about. They just don't have any kind of information about it, and it's really sad to see that the people who are actually the key figures just don't have the capacity to understand this.
What I've heard here, Lon, maybe or John, I don't know what you've heard, but it seems to relate to President Trump's policies and global warming and a belief. I mean, I think it's been reported here in this part of the world that President Trump doesn't believe the scientific evidence about global warming. And so he's sort of going on a different set of policies. I know you were saying he's a different ideology, but he seems to have a fundamental different belief set. He's discarding the scientific information and saying, well, no, it's not really, global warming is not really caused by the sort of things we believe it's being caused by. I think, is that the point that Hungary is making, that the student in Hungary is making?
Well, I think this is a very complex challenge that you are bringing because it really raises the question of how democratic systems work to deliver political leadership in whatever system that democratic process follows. But it also raises a simultaneous question with how authoritarian systems work and whether or not conclusions reached in authoritarian systems do more good or more damage, depending upon who's in charge. And so what I worry about as a person who has had a very strong involvement in public policy. What I worry about is that the political process, as exercised in nations around the world, is not a very efficient way for policy to be established on the environment or on energy. Now think about what I just said. The political systems of the nations of the world are essentially a very inefficient system for establishing public policy on the environment and on energy. If the political system is not efficient, is there a system that can be? Would anyone trust, for example, the United Nations? I think the answer is doubtful. The trust of the United Nations is pretty low. But now let me move in a parallel sense.
John, let me stop for a sec. Hold on. Because just stop for a sec. There's a student here who wants to add to this to answer your question. Also, I need to remind everybody, we only have 10 minutes left, by the way, just so you know. But John, can we let the student answer, then we'll come back to you, okay? So,
yes, fine.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna ask, like, what makes you say that we can't have a governing body on like energy? Is it because like of what you said with the whole like you can't govern? Like, is it because you can't govern the way an electron works? Is that why you're saying that, John?
No, I'm getting ready to answer that we can have a governing body,
Okay.
but it's a very different governing body than we're used to. What I'm arguing, what I'm presenting is the notion that parliaments, legislatures, prime ministers, presidents, premiers, people of the political call, people who are supported by a political party or political money or political endeavor, are the least efficient to make the decisions of environment or energy, because there is a more efficient system that we have yet to bring to prominence. Another way of saying it, I don't trust politicians. Obama begot Trump. What a nightmare. What a nightmare.
Well,
you know,
also I should remind everyone here, John, I should remind everyone here that you were on the record and you were quoted and it was reported on in the press that you refused to take money from figures, political figures. You refused to even give money to senators and congressmen as a way of influencing them when you were president of Shell. You refused to play that game, in other words.
True. That's true. I don't trust the politicians. And unfortunately, we don't have a very good alternative at the moment. And so therefore, we do 99 pages of unenforceable language, which is a joke on the people of the world, unfortunately. I'm being cynical when I say it that strongly, I realize. But I'm just saying that the politicians are one of the least efficient mechanisms. Now, I'm not proposing the free market, that we rely on the free market. Here's what I'm proposing. We have, in the world today, a very efficient and effective system of central banks managing the monetary system of the world. The prime ministers and the legislatures leave the central banks alone, because the central banks are subject matter experts, and while they're not perfect, they do a pretty darn good job of managing the financial and monetary requirements of the global economy. Whether it's the Bank of France, the Bank of England, the Bank of the United States, called the Federal Reserve, whatever it may be, the banks of the world do a good job of managing the monetary systems that enable the world to operate. And we don't elect those people. They don't run for office. We don't know what political party they belong to. But countries have followed a model of creating central bank regulations and laws that the politicians leave alone because they're smart enough to know they don't know anything about the monetary systems. What I'm arguing for, and my book is really based on this, why don't we set up a common system of energy and environmental regulatory bodies that are filled with subject matter experts to deal with the environmental and the energy needs of the world in a similar fashion to how we deal with the monetary needs of the world. In the money system, we need a supply of money, we need interest rates to price that money, we need availability to access to that money, and we need systems to punish those who abuse their monetary privileges. That works. Why can't we have such a similar system for the energy and environmental system so that the politicians can get on with things that they know something about? Most politicians know nothing about energy. They're as ignorant as the people who elect them in many cases, and yet we depend upon them for policy. That's a sad joke on the people of the world. And somehow we've got to, whether it's democratic or authoritarian, we need a system of regulatory governance, of leadership, if we're going to come to grips with the serious issues of the future of energy and the future of the environment. Our world depends upon it. It's too important to leave to politicians because, I mean, just look at the U.S. I'll point to our country as one of the best, worst examples of political responsibility. To go from Bush to Obama to Trump, my goodness, what a joke that is. But the American people didn't have any other choice. And so here we are. And if you want to understand Mr. Trump, a little piece of advice. Study the 1950s. If you study the 1950s, you will understand Donald Trump. That's when he grew up. That's when he learned what he knows. And he shut off his learning capability sometime after the 1950s. So if he talks about make America great again, he's thinking about the 1950s when he grew up. And 1950s was a great decade for the United States. We just finished a war for freedom, and freedom won. We had the biggest military in the world that was all powerful. We had all kinds of other capabilities. The economy's growing by 4 and 5% per year. We had all kinds of other things happening, energy especially. We didn't think much about the environment, and we got on with prosperity. And so that's where Donald Trump's head is. And so people who voted for him are stuck in a paradigm of the 1950s. I personally don't think that's good enough for the 2020s. But it is what it is.
20 seconds. Oh, that's so. Your frankness is so appreciated, John. Paul, we've got 4 minutes left, but we got to get to the students. It's their class. So,
is there somebody there in Canada? Is there somebody in Canada?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Christian, I think wants to add something.
Yeah, I was just like, when we talk about energy, and then we automatically it goes straight to environment, and then we go to the politics of it, to the money of it, and we looked at France and the rules that are unenforced. It's the thing of, if we want great energy, we want to get around faster, and we want to do all these things, even to having a toilet full of water, right? But it's on a high waste level. Is there a possibility that there's no equal? It's one, if you do one, then you lose the other. So is there that constant sacrifice? So if we want a greener world, do we, instead of cars, do we remove cars? Do we take horses again? Or instead of flushing our, like if we look at us, right, we flush our water, and you try to tell that to someone that lives in a third world country, that every day you wake up and because of a smell, you flush your water in clean water. And right, it doesn't make sense. So do we balance it out, or do we just constantly this unbalanced system where we decide, well, today it's energy day and today it's environment day?
It's a very good question, and it reflects the dilemma of life as we know it. As a sustainability scientist today, and I do work for the Global Institute of Sustainability at Arizona State, as you know, what we teach in the sustainability curricula is optimization of choice. There are all kinds of choices that we have an opportunity to make. And I would encourage you to reflect on choice, because it's all about choice. And we can make choices that compromise, choices that have long-term benefits, choices that have short-term benefits. And what are the choices that we intend to make? I think, for example, if you replace cars with horses, you end up with 8 feet deep manure every morning in New York City, because the amount of horsepower on the streets of New York would yield 8 feet thick of horse manure every morning. It's that big of a problem. Horses are dirtier than cars. Now, the atmosphere takes away the waste of the cars. People would have to take away the waste of the horses. I'm being facetious, but it's true. In the case of other choices we make, shifting the world to public transportation, protecting that public transportation, I think Europe leads the world in public transportation and has for decades. It's a marvelous way of mobility. It's freedom at low cost per capita. Cars are an expensive alternative, but we make the choice in North America in particular to emphasize cars over public transport, especially in the U.S. So there are options out there for all of us, and it's up to intelligent people with knowledge to make those choices. And I'm afraid we too often don't make good choices.
John, thank you very much for those comments. Lon, we're just at 4:45.
Yeah, we're done. I mean, Paul, well, first, I just want to say on behalf of my students, what a privilege it has been to listen to you, John, speak so frankly with the kind of experience that you have in helping us to look at the future in a very realistic way and hopeful way. So thank you, John, for coming. And I'll leave it. Budapest, guys, you have anything to add before Paul?
Before you leave, you referenced your book a couple of times, and I'm sure there are students in the rows that would love to read it and replace ignorance with knowledge. So if you could just repeat the full title of your book so we could look it up, that would be great. And one thing that we wanted time for now, but perhaps next time if you're willing to come back. There is, and I'm advertising everything now, but the Global Class and Durham College is building the Center for Collaborative Education now. The Global Class is getting 2,000 square feet in there for an actual global classroom. And, I was wondering if you could compile a list or just make suggestions as to what would it take for the global classroom or for the center to get the John Hofmeister stamp of approval for an environmentally conscious design. Because I think that, just in the hopes that one day perhaps we'll all be there in the center and shaking hands with one another, and it would be cool if there was a little stamp on the wall.
It's a very good question, and with respect to my book, it's called Why We Hate the Oil Companies, Straight Talk from an Energy Insider, published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2010. Parts of it are dated, but parts of it are evergreen. What I would say is that the book predicts a transitional 21st century where we will come to grips with the choices that need to be made between environmental and energy-rich possibilities, that we will make good choices over the course of this century, and that we will position ourselves for a 22nd century very, very different from the 20th, and again, quite different from especially the first half of the 21st century. We will be, according to my research and writing, we will be a CO2-free energy system if we get our act together in the 21st century by the second half of the 21st century. But every year we delay, and we've delayed 17 years so far in this century, whether Obama, whether Trump, whether Putin, whether Xi, whether May, or whoever the Trudeau or whoever the prime ministers are, we're not making progress. And the more we delay, the longer it will take. And so, but I show a pathway forward, including the governance pathway, which I believe will take us to a very different place over the course of 50 to 75 years. But that's how long it will take.
Lon, I found the session really interesting, and I think John's insights have been really valuable. There's just four things I thought that maybe we'll just close on this point before thanking John formally. And the question, is oil a blessing in disguise? Probably not. We're stuck with it and we need it. Whereas we do see a path forward, and there is hope based on what John said. It's not going to happen sometime. It's not going to happen too quickly. The global governance system modelled on the central banks is really interesting idea in terms of getting over the inefficiencies of government in managing energy and all that flows from that. There are alternatives in terms of biomass. We talked about that, and from the students' perspective, and I keep saying this to my own students, that I think in this broad area of sustainability, there are going to be huge business opportunities and career opportunities, whether it's in electric cars or new services, like instead of people owning cars, that they rent them for a short space of time. All those opportunities are going to open up. The big challenge is moving people from ignorance, that we are dirty, as you said, John, and we are ignorant. And it's what can we do individually in terms of moving that in our spheres of influence, in our respective spheres of influence. And then finally, I think the point you made that resonated with me was that we have choices. We've got choices to make in terms of what we're going to do, how we go forward in terms of transport. Huge reliance on cars, and certainly in Europe, I know the policy in Europe is sort of being driven down, and really what Europe is saying in terms of policy is that, look, for intercity trains, high-speed trains, for local journeys, you walk or you use a bicycle, and for getting in and out of the city, you use a tram or a bus. And I think what you're sort of mentioning all of those things. Unless you want to say anything, Don, maybe we just hand over to John and get him to say some concluding remarks, and to thank you, John.
All I will say is thank you for the opportunity, and if there's a chance in the future, I would love to come back again.
Thank you. For sure. Thank you very much. Just to remind everybody, this class has been, of course, live streamed, and the recording will be on the website as a resource, and this will be a very rich resource, particularly what John said and your summary at the end, Paul, as well as the student comments. So see you again in the global class, guys. Take care.
Cheers. Good luck.
Good luck.